Good day, everyone. Today, we are going to study two approaches to pattern differentiation in traditional Chinese medicine: Sanjiao pattern differentiation and 12-channel pattern differentiation. Before we begin, I want you to remember something very important about TCM diagnosis. We do not diagnose simply by asking, "What disease does this patient have?" We always try to determine a pattern. We ask, where is the disease located? How deep has it gone? What functional system is affected? What is the nature of the pathogenic influence? And how is the body responding to it? The two systems we will discuss today answer somewhat different questions. Sanjiao differentiation is specially concerned with the location and progression of worm disease. It looks at the body in terms of the three broad functional regions: the upper jaw, the middle jaw, and the lower jaw. We can think of these very simply as asking, how deeply has the pathogenic process entered the body? The 12-channel system, on the other hand, asks a somewhat different question: along which channel is the disorder manifesting? Here, we pay attention not only to internal organ symptoms, but also to the pathway of symptoms where pain occurs, where swelling occurs, which parts of the body are affected, and what internal organ manifestations accompany those external signs. So, do not confuse the two. Sanjiao differentiation primarily gives us a way of understanding disease progression and depth, especially in worm disease. We're already done with the first set of worm diseases. Now we move to this one, Sanjiao. The 12-channel differentiation, on the other hand, helps us identify channel involvement and distribution of symptoms, particularly useful in acupuncture, moxibustion, and related therapies. Throughout the lecture today, I want you to practice thinking spatially. Instead of memorizing lists, ask, where is the pathology? What is happening there? And where might it go next? That is the diagnostic logic behind this presentation. It is 11:30 a.m. and I am actually going to pre-record this one because I was called to a meeting this afternoon. I still owe you one more recording on case diagnosis as instructed by Sister Regina. And this is the video you will have to cover and watch for next week. But because this lecture will only run for about an hour and a half, please expect a more or less longer lecture on case reporting, that is also that I'm also going to pre-record so that it remains accessible to all of us. So, what is Sanjiao pattern differentiation? The slide tells us that Sanjiao pattern differentiation became particularly important for diagnosing worm diseases, especially conditions in which heat and dampness occur together. It is associated with Wu Tong of the Qing dynasty, while drawing upon earlier Chinese medical theory, including the Yellow Emperor's inner classic Wang Tinei and the Wei Qi Yin and Blood framework. Now, what does Sanjiao mean here? You already know Sanjiao as one of the six Fu organs. But in this diagnostic framework, do not imagine the Sanjiao simply as an anatomical organ. Here, Sanjiao becomes a way of mapping the body functionally into three regions. We have upper jaw, middle jaw, and lower jaw. And each region is associated with particular organ systems. The upper jaw is particularly associated with the lung and pericardium. The middle jaw is specially associated with spleen and stomach. The lower jaw is particularly associated with the kidney and liver. But these are not merely three places. They also represent a possible movement of disease. That is the key. Imagine a pathologic process entering the body. It may remain relatively superficial. If the body successfully eliminates it, the disease stops there. But if the pathogenic factor persists and penetrates more deeply, manifestations change. So, Sanjiao differentiation allows us to understand illness almost as a story unfolding through the body. The symptoms tells us where we are in that story. Upper jaw tends to represent an earlier and more superficial stage. Middle jaw represents deeper movement, particularly digestive transformation and transportation. Lower jaw represents still deeper disease, um, frequently involving depletion, especially injury to yin and essence. So, one very useful way to remember Sanjiao differentiation is upper, invasion, middle, transformation and accumulation, lower, depletion. That is simplified, of course, but it gives you a useful mental map. And clinically, that matters because the treatment principle changes depending upon where the disease is located and what it has done to the body's resources. Let's look at the general law of transformation. Now we arrive at the basic law of Sanjiao transmission. There are three levels here. First, upper jaw. This primarily involves the lung and pericardium and ordinarily represents the initial, relatively superficial stage. Second, middle jaw. This principally involves the spleen and stomach, representing a deeper stage of disease. Third, lower jaw. This principally involves the kidneys and liver. Matay na naman. Okay, just a moment. There, it's moving now. Uh, this primarily involves kidney and liver, representing a deepest and potentially more severe stage. So I'm pre-recording because I'm having problems with my laptop and hope you bear with it. So the normal sequence, therefore, is upper, middle, lower, or conceptually superficial, deeper, deepest, and generally milder to more severe. But be careful here. This is a diagnostic model, not a rigid mechanical law. We should not think that every worm disease must pass through exactly three stages in an orderly manner. The slide itself emphasizes the exemptions occur. Different jaw regions can sometimes be involved simultaneously. So what we are learning is a general tendency of transmission, not an inflexible sequence. Let us imagine a simple case. A patient initially develops fever, mild aversion to wind, cough, thirst, and sweating. These symptoms suggest involvement of the upper jaw, particularly the lung. Now, suppose the condition is not resolved. Several days later, the patient develops pronounced abdominal fullness, constipation, intense thirst, and stronger interior signs, heat signs. The nature of the presentation has changed. We now see, we may now be seeing involvement of the middle jaw, particularly a Yang Ming type presentation. So if the disease continue for a long time, intense heat may consume yin and fluids. Later, we may see manifestations such as a dry mouth, fatigue, feverish sensations in the palms and soles, a red tongue with white little coating, and a deficient rapid pulse. Now the disease has changed again. The central problem is no longer merely the invading pathogen. The body itself has been depleted by the prolonged disease. That is characteristic of lower jaw involvement. So, when you diagnose Sanjiao patterns, do not merely ask what symptoms are present. Ask instead, what do these symptoms tell me about the movement of the disease? That is the more important question. Let's look at it one by one. Now we focus on the upper jaw. The presentation identifies upper jaw patterns as arising when warm heat pathogens invade the lung channel of the hand tyin. These lung level patterns represent an early and relatively superficial stage of warm disease. There are two major lung patterns shown here. The first is warm pathogen assails lung way, and the second is heat retained in the lung. This may sound similar because both involve heat and the lung, but diagnostically, they represent different depths. Let's examine the first. Warm pathogen assails lung way. The patient may present with headache, fever, mild aversion to wind and cold, sweating, cough, and thirst. The tongue may show redness, particularly at the tip and sides, and the pulse is described as floating and rapid. Notice the combination: fever plus some aversion to cold or wind. That combination tells us that there is still an important exterior component. The pathogen has entered, but it has not fully penetrated into the interior. The lungs dispersing and descending function becomes disturbed. Therefore, we see cough. Heat begins to affect fluids. Therefore, we see thirst. The exterior is disturbed. Therefore, we see fever together with some aversion to wind or cold. Now compare these with the second pattern: heat retained in the lung. Here, the patient has fever without aversion to cold. Just a minute, please. I have a delivery. I'll just get it. Sorry for that. I have a delivery. Going back, uh, so heat retained in the lung is a type of fever without aversion to cold. Sweating, thirst, cough, panting, a yellow tongue coating, and a rapid pulse. The critical difference is that the disease has moved more decisively toward the interior. The aversion to cold disappears. That is diagnostically very important. So when comparing these two patterns, ask, is the interior involved or not anymore? That is something you have to pay attention to. If yes, you can think of these more as toward warm pathogen assailing the lung. But if the exterior signs have disappeared, and stronger interior signs dominate, think toward heat retained in the lung. This is how pattern differentiation works. We do not memorize symptoms independently. We constantly look at the relationships among symptoms. We said too that the upper jaw is not only about the lung, but also about the pericardium. Now, this is a much more serious development. Ordinarily, we said that worm disease tend to move upper, middle, lower. But sometimes heat does something different. Instead of following the ordinary sequence, unresolved heat at the lung level may penetrate directly into the pericardium. The presentation calls this reverse transmission. And the resulting pattern is heat attacks the pericardium. The clinical manifestation listed here are severe: high fever, loss of consciousness, delirium, inability to speak, cold limbs, and a stiff red crimson tongue. Now, this is very important. The patient is no longer presenting simply with cough, thirst, and fever. We now have disturbance of consciousness. And that tells us that the pathogenic heat has affected a much more critical functional level. In TCM theory, the pericardium protects the heart. The heart houses the Shen. Therefore, when heat penetrates the pericardium, disturbances of the Shen can appear. That is why we see delirium, clouding or loss of consciousness, and inability to speak appropriately. And notice something that initially seems contradictory. The patient has high fever, yet the limbs may be cold. You might ask, if this is a heat condition, why are the hands and feet cold? Because the presentation is not simply about body temperature. The idea is that severe pathogenic heat in the interior disrupts the normal movement of qi and prevents yang qi from reaching the extremities properly. So the center can be intensely hot while the limbs become cold. That is why TCM diagnosis cannot be reduced to cold limbs means cold syndrome. Not necessarily. You must examine the entire pattern. If you have cold limbs together with high fever, delirium, loss of consciousness, and a crimson tongue, we are dealing with something very different from a straightforward cold deficiency syndrome. That's why it's there in the slide, on the slide. Never interpret one symptom in isolation. A symptom acquires meaning from the patterns in which it appears. And this also introduces one of the most important distinctions in Sanjiao theory. Ordinary transmission versus reverse transmission. Ordinary transmission generally moves upper, middle, lower. Reverse transmission may move from the lung directly to the pericardium, representing a more dangerous progression. We will see this pathological logic more clearly in the succeeding slides, where the presentation maps the three major upper jaw pathways in a flowchart. At this point, you should understand one central idea. Sanjiao differentiation is not merely memorizing upper, middle, lower. It is learning to read disease dynamically as location, depth, transformation, and transmission. In the succeeding slides, we will make this more concrete. Before we move from the basic concepts into pathogenesis diagrams, then into the two major middle jaw possibilities, Yangming dryness and Taiyin damp heat, before entering the lower jaw. So let's look at the upper jaw pathogenesis, and I will decrease. This is the figure from the book. Now we have identified the major upper jaw patterns. Now let's see how the symptoms develop from the underlying pathogenesis. There are three possible upper jaw pathways. Warm pathogen assails the lung way. Heat enters the interior and accumulates in the lung, and abnormal penetration into the pericardium. Let's take them one at a time. First, we have warm pathogen assails the lung qi. So let me go and enlarge that section so that you can see it very clearly. The pathogen disturbs the function of the lung way. What happens? So the slide explains that the wei qi becomes trapped and the lung qi cannot properly disperse and descend. Remember the normal function of the lung. It disperses and descends qi. If that function is obstructed, the patient develops fever, mild aversion to wind and cold, and cough. The fever and aversion to wind or cold tell us that the pathogenic factor is relatively superficial. The cough tells us that the lungs' descending function is affected. Next, the pathogen can harass the clear orifices. This produces headache. The pathogen also injures fluids. What symptom follows? Thirst. And when heat vaporizes fluids outward, we see sweating. So notice the logic of the diagram. It does not simply say, here is a list of symptoms. It tells us pathogenic mechanism, clinical manifestation. That is a much better way of learning TCM. Instead of memorizing that warm pathogen assailing lung way equals fever, headache, thirst, sweating, and cough, understand why those symptoms occur. If the lung qi cannot disperse and descend, there is cough. If heat injures fluids, there is thirst. If fluids are pushed outward, there is sweating. And because this is still a relatively superficial warm pattern, the pulse is floating and rapid. And the tongue tip and sides become red. Let's move forward and look at the second pattern. Heat pathogen enters the interior and accumulates in the lung. This means the pathogen has penetrated more deeply. The lung again becomes unable to descend properly. So what happens? Cough and panting. But notice an important difference. Because the pathogen is now situated in the interior, the patient has fever without aversion to cold. That is one of the signs that helps us distinguish this pattern from the earlier lung way pattern. The interior heat also causes thirst, sweating, yellow tongue coating, and a rapid pulse. So again, think about movement. Earlier, exterior involvement. Now, interior lung heat. The third pattern is the most severe. Abnormal penetration into the pericardium. Here, the pathogen disturbs the mind. The manifestation include loss of consciousness, delirium, clouding of the mind, and inability to speak. The slide also shows that exuberant heat rises upward, producing high fever. At the same time, yang qi is constrained inward and cannot reach the limbs. Therefore, the limbs may become cold. Finally, intense heat scorches and injures yin, producing the red crimson tongue. So the main lesson from the entire diagram is that the same pathogenic process can produce very different symptoms depending upon where it is located and what physiological functions it disrupts. That is why identifying pathogenesis is more important than simply memorizing symptom list. And I will repeat that over and over again. Now let's look at middle jaw pattern or what we call Yangming dryness. And I will cut the slide and focus only on the symptoms already. We now move from the upper jaw into the middle jaw. The middle jaw principally involves the spleen and stomach. But once a warm heat pathogen reaches this level, it can develop in different directions. The first possibility shown here is Yangming dryness. That's the first that we will look at. No? So there are many patterns, but in the middle jaw, but we will look at Yangming dryness pattern or the Yangming dryness pattern first. Okay? So accordingly, when pathogens, just a minute, I opened something that should not be opened. When the pathogen transforms into dryness, it enters the Yangming system, particularly involving the stomach and large intestine. Dryness and heat combine with intestinal contents. The result is a classic pattern of interior excess and intense heat accumulation. And this produces four important group manifestations. First, fever and heat signs. The patient may develop tidal fever that becomes worse at dusk, flushed face, thirst for cold drinks, burnt or dry lips, and dark urine. Notice the quality of the thirst. The patient wants cold drinks. Why? Because the heat is intense. This is not mild exterior heat anymore. We are dealing with a much stronger interior heat condition. Second, digestive obstruction. We see abdominal fullness, abdominal distension, and constipation. Why constipation? Because dryness and heat bind the intestinal contents. The intestines lose moisture, the stool becomes difficult to pass. So, think of these as heat plus dryness plus obstruction. That combination, heat plus dryness plus obstruction, is very useful in recognizing this pattern. Third, mental disturbance, delirium, and restlessness. Again, intense heat can disturb the mind. This means that mental disturbance is not restricted to pericardium involvement. However, the entire pattern must be examined. If delirium appears together with severe constipation, abdominal fullness, intense thirst, and Yang-Ming heat signs, the diagnostic picture is different from a pericardium pattern. This is why one symptom cannot determine the diagnosis. And fourth, tongue and pulse. The tongue coating is yellow and dry, sometimes with prickles. The pulse is deep and powerful. This is important. A deep and powerful pulse reflects an interior excess pattern. So if I want you to remember Yang-Ming dryness using only a few words, remember high heat, great dryness, intestinal obstruction, interior excess, and clinically, constipation becomes one of the most important clues. Let's look at the middle jaw pattern. Again, this time no longer Yang-Ming but Tai-Yin. No? Tai-Yin. No? I will go to the symptoms only. So instead of transforming into dryness, the pathogen can transform into dampness. When this happens, the presentation shifts toward the foot Tai-Yin spleen channel. Dampness and heat combine and obstruct the transforming and transporting functions of the middle jaw. This gives us a pattern that is very different from Yang-Ming dryness. The easiest way to understand it is to remember the nature of dampness. Dampness is heavy, sticky, lingering, and obstructive. So the manifestation reflect those qualities. Fever pattern. Instead of the intense fever of Yang-Ming dryness, the slide describes slight fever, worse in the afternoon. The heat is described as being veiled by dampness, which prevents it from rising sharply. This is an important contrast. Yang-Ming dryness gives us more pronounced heat. Tai-Yin dampness gives us heat that appears more muffled or constrained by dampness. Body and head. The patient experiences heaviness of the limbs and head. That makes sense because dampness has a heavy quality. The person may describe the body as heavy, sluggish, weighed down, and the head may feel cloudy and or heavy. This explains that dampness weighs down the body and clouds the mind. digestive signs. The patient may have chest and epigastric fullness, nausea, loose stool, or sloppy stool. Now, compare that with Yang-Ming dryness. Yang-Ming dryness tends toward constipation. Tai-Yin damp heat tends toward loose or sloppy stools. Why? Because the spleen's transforming and transporting functions are obstructed. So this difference becomes clinically very useful. And if I give you two patients with fever and abdominal discomfort, do not stop there. Ask, is the stool dry and constipated? Or is it loose or and sloppy? That single distinction may help point you toward very different middle jaw patterns. Tongue and pulse. The hallmark tongue finding is yellow, greasy coating. The pulse is soggy and rapid. The yellow tells us there is heat. The greasy quality tells us there is dampness. So you can almost read the tongue as a summary of the pattern. Yellow, heat; greasy, dampness. Finally, the slide emphasizes that damp heat patterns are often more difficult to resolve because dampness is sticky and lingering. That is a very important clinical characteristic. Now let's look at the middle jaw pathogenesis. And as again, I will highlight only, there are two, right? I will go to the first two there, the first one of the two above. So this slide brings together the two middle jaw possibilities that we have discussed. The pathogen entering the middle jaw may transform in one or two directions: dryness or dampness. Pathway 1, dryness. When the pathogen transforms into dryness, we see the Yang-Ming type pattern. Heat and dryness injure fluids. What happens when fluids are damaged? We get thirst, dry mouth, dry lips, dark urine. When dryness affects the intestines, the second contents become bound. Then we get abdominal fullness and constipation. Heat can also rise upward. So we see body heat and flushed complexion. If intense heat disturbs the mind, delirium may occur. The pulse becomes deep and powerful. The tongue coating becomes yellow and dry, sometimes dark or prickled. So the logic is dryness consumes fluid and binds the intestines. That produces the Yang-Ming picture. Aside from dryness, we can also develop into dampness. So dryness and dampness. When the pathogen transforms into dampness, it affects the middle jaw differently. Instead of drying and binding, dampness obstructs. It impairs the stomach's descending function. Therefore, we may see epigastric fullness, nausea, and vomiting. It impairs the spleen's transformation and transportation. Therefore, loose or sloppy stool may occur. Damp heat depresses and steams. Therefore, slight fever appears. Dampness encumbers the body and obstructs the movement of qi. Therefore, heaviness of the limbs, body, and head. And again, the tongue and pulse are extremely useful. Yellow, greasy coating, soggy, rapid pulse. So when comparing these two middle jaw patterns, I want you to remember this simple contrast. Yang Ming dryness, dry, hot, bound, constipated. Tying damp heat, heavy, sticky, obstructed, loose stools. That distinction will help you tremendously when identifying the two patterns. Now let's go to the lower jaw patterns. Uh, and this is the deepest of all, right? So now we enter the lower jaw. And this represents the deepest stage in the progression. No? So there are basically two principal channels that are affected here. And you will see it says in the slide, there will be a kidney channel, one that involves the kidney channel of the foot Shaoyin, and one that will involve the liver channel of the foot Jueyin. No? So those are the two organs that will be involved. So at this point, something important has changed. Earlier in the disease, our attention was mainly on the pathogenic factor, warmth, heat, dampness, dryness. But in prolonged disease, the pathogenic heat begins to damage the body's own yin and essence. So the problem is no longer simply there is too much heat. Now we also have there is too little yin. This is why lower jaw patterns often show deficiency heat rather than simple excess heat. And we begin immediately with the kidney yin deficiency, as you have here in front of you. The kidney yin deficiency carries within it fever with malar flash, feverish sensation in the chest, palms, and soles. This is quite different from the strong excess fever we saw in the middle jaw Yang-Ming pattern. Why? Because now the heat arises in the context of yin depletion. The cooling and nourishing aspects of the body has been damaged. Therefore, relative heat becomes more apparent. Let's look at it one by one. Fluid depletion. No? Fluid depletion. The patient, as we've said, in fluid depletion, may develop dry mouth and throat, spirit fatigue, and deafness. Notice again the change in the character of disease. Earlier, the body was actively struggling against an invading pathogen. Now the patient's resources are being consumed. We therefore see more signs of dryness, fatigue, deficiency, and depletion. Tongue and pulse. The pulse is rapid and deficient. The tongue is red with scanty coating. Again, Uh, compare these with the earlier excess pattern. Yangming dryness, deep and powerful pulse. Kidney yin deficiency, rapid and deficient pulse. So the pulse itself tells us that the nature of the disease has shifted and the coating has become scanty because the body's fluids and yin have been consumed. So again, if we're almost done with the three, no? Upper jaw, the pathogen enters. Middle jaw, the pathogen accumulates or transforms. Lower jaw, prolonged heat begins to consume yin and essence. That is the developmental logic of Sanjiao differentiation. The next slide will take us this one step further. When kidney yin becomes severely depleted, the liver may also lose nourishment, leading to the steering of internal liver wind. There, steering of the internal liver wind. I have to make the slide smaller because the symptoms are better to show. We now move to the more critical form of lower jaw involvement. In the previous slide, we saw that prolonged worm disease can consume kidney yin, and once kidney yin becomes severely depleted, another problem develops. And this will explain to you the five-phase relationship of water failing to nourish wood. Water refers here to the kidney, while wood refers to the liver. The kidney and liver are closely related in terms of yin and essence. So if kidney yin becomes severely depleted, liver yin may no longer be adequately nourished. When the liver loses this nourishing and restraining influence, internal wind may arise. The presentation describes these as the most critical lower jaw pattern. So there is a sequence here. Prolonged heat consumes yin, kidney yin becomes deficient, liver loses nourishment, deficiency wind is stirred. This is not simply there is wind. We need to understand why the wind appears. It is wind arising from profound deficiency. So let's give several group manifestations. First, the wind steering signs. So we see wriggling of hands and feet and clonic convulsions. Why do we associate this with wind? Think again about the nature of wind in TCM. Wind is characterized by movement, change, shaking, trembling, spasms. Therefore, when we see involuntary movement, tremors, wriggling, convulsions, we think to begin of internal wind. But notice that this is not liver yang rising in an otherwise strong patient. It arises specifically from severe yin depletion. Second, cardiac manifestations, violent palpitations, and heart vexation. Why might the heart become disturbed? Because deficient heat continues to disturb the system. Again, notice that deficiency does not necessarily mean cold. Yin deficiency can produce deficiency heat. So the patient may be extremely depleted, yet still manifest heat type agitation. Third, spirit and energy. We see spirit fatigue and exhaustion. This tells us how severe the depletion has become. And at this point, we are not simply treating a pathogen, the body's fundamental resources are becoming exhausted. Lastly, tongue and pulse. The tongue is crimson with diminished coating. The pulse is deficient and rapid. Again, crimson tongue indicates significant heat involvement, while the diminished coating reflects damage to yin and fluids. And the pulse remain rapid because there is heat, but deficient because the body's resources have been depleted. Yin collapse with wind steering. So if I ask you, what's the difference between previous kidney yin deficiency pattern and this one? How do we distinguish the two? Uh, in kidney yin deficiency, yin has been damaged. In this pattern, yin depletion has become severe enough that internal liver wind begins to steer. That is why involuntary movements and convulsions become particularly important diagnostic signs. So let's look and push this further, no? And look at the two pathogeneses for lower liver jiao. There are two patterns that comes out, right? Let's look at this one. So kidney and liver yin deficiency. So first, consumption of kidney yin leads to malnourishment of the ear orifice. The manifestation is deafness. This reflects the traditional relationship between the kidney and the ears. So when the kidney essence and yin are seriously depleted, hearing may be affected. Second, the diagram explains the insufficient kidney resources failing to produce enough marrow to nourish the brain. The manifestation is spirit fatigue. Again, this represents profound depletion. Third, consumption of yin creates an apparent relative excess of yang. We then see dry mouth and throat and feverish sensations in the chest, palms, and soles. Notice the phrase apparent excess of yang. This is important because the yang is not necessarily absolutely excessive. Rather, yin has become insufficient to restrain and balance it. That is why it is called deficient heat. The presentation on the first part summarizes this part by noting that kidney yin consumption produces deafness, spirit fatigue, and feverish sensations. The diagram then moves into the second process. Water is unable to nourish wood. In other words, kidney yin cannot sufficiently nourish liver yin. The sinews lose nourishment. Then we see wrinkling of the limbs and convulsions. The pattern develop into deficiency wind. The heart may also become stirred or agitated. Finally, we see the combined signs, spirit fatigue, deficiency pulse, crimson tongue, diminished coating. All of these point toward the same fundamental process, depletion of yin essence. So the slide summarizes the progression very clearly. Failure of water to nourish wood allows liver yin deficiency to produce wrinkling limbs, convulsion, and steering of the heart. So I want you to understand the lower jaw as a depletion model. It basically represents something is depleted, right? Something is depleted in the process. So the upper jaw asks, what is the pathogen invading? The middle jaw asks, how has the pathogen transformed or accumulated? Lower jaw increasingly asks, what has prolonged disease consumed? This distinction will help you understand the whole Sanjiao system. Now we can summarize how disease moves through the Sanjiao. There are two important forms. Ordinary transmission, upper, middle, lower jaw. In other words, the disease moves from superficial to deep, no? And we need to describe this as pathogen progressively move inward. So imagine the progression we have studied. At first, the lung way may be affected. We see fever, mild aversion to wind, cough, thirst. Then the disease enters the middle jaw. Perhaps it becomes yang ming dryness, high fever, thirst, constipation, abdominal fullness. Or perhaps it becomes tayin, dampit, heaviness, nausea, slappy tools, yellow greasy coating. Then, after prolonged illness, yin may become depleted. The disease reaches the lower jaw, kidney yin deficiency, liver yin deficiency, possibly deficiency wind. That is the logic of ordinary transmission. But there's such a thing as a reverse transmission. So the slide explains reverse transition when heat pathogen bypass the normal route and transmit directly from the lung to the pericardium. This is more severe. So instead of upper, middle, lower, we may get lung pericardium. And because the pericardium protects the heart and the shen, the patient may quickly develop high fever, delirium, loss of consciousness, inability to speak. So, why is reverse transmission important? Because severity does not always depend on how long the patient has been sick. A disease does not have to bypass slowly through all the three jaw before becoming dangerous. Some pathological processes can deteriorate quickly. There's one more important point on this slide. Transmission rules are not absolute. So the slide explicitly notes that upper, middle, and lower jaw disorders may sometimes coexist. And that means that real patients may not fit neatly into one textbook box. A patient may have symptoms indicating more than one jaw. This is why we need to emphasize systematic analysis. The question is not which single box does the patient belong to, it is which levels are involved, which patterns predominates, and how is the disease changing. That makes Sanjiao differentiation a dynamic diagnostic system rather than simply a classification system. Now we begin the second part of the presentation on the 12-channel differentiation. So far we have focused only on Sanjiao differentiation. Now we turn to the 12-channel pattern differentiation. The presentation describes channel and network pattern identification as the application of channel theory to clinical manifestations. This requires a shift in how we think diagnostically. With Sanjiao, we are asking at what level or depth is the disease located. With the 12-channel differentiation, we increasingly ask along which pathway is the disorder manifesting. That is a different diagnostic question. Remember that the channels connect the interior and the exterior. They connect the Zangfu organs with the limbs, trunk, head, sensory organs, and the body's surface. Therefore, pathology may manifest not only as internal organ symptoms but also along the course of the channels. For example, suppose a patient has shoulder pain. Shoulder pain by itself is not enough information. We ask, where exactly is the pain? Anterior, lateral, posterior? Does it extend to the arm? Which fingers are involved? Are there accompanying internal symptoms? So, if the pain follows a particular channel pathway, that distribution becomes diagnostically useful. This is why 12-channel pattern differentiation becomes especially important in therapies that act directly on the channels. What are those? Acupuncture, moxibustion, and tuina. So, and this will complement your Zangfu pattern identification. So it does not replace organ diagnosis. Two approaches work together. So, how does the channel arises, no? So, the slide reminds us that the 12 principal channels connect internally with the Zangfu organs and externally with the limbs and body surface. They transport qi and contribute to nourishing the body. So there are three ways channel problems may appear. First, external pathogen invasion. External pathogen factors such as cold, wind, damp, or heat may invade the channels. When this happens, the flow of channel qi may be obstructed. And what happens when qi does not move freely? We frequently see pain, stiffness, heaviness, swelling, limited movement. This is one of the simplest ways to understand channel pathology. Obstruction produces symptoms along the pathway. For example, wind, cold, damp invading a channel may produce pain and restricted movement along the channel's course. The exact symptoms depends upon both the nature of the pathogen and the channel involved. Second, simultaneous channel and organ signs. The second possibility is that symptoms of the channel and its related organ occur together. This is extremely important clinically because the channel does not exist separately from the organ system. For example, imagine a lung-related pattern. The patient might have internal manifestations such as cough or panting, while also having symptoms along the lung channel pathway such as discomfort involving the chest, shoulder, or medial arm. So you get two these dimensions at the same time, organ manifestation plus channel manifestation. That makes your diagnosis stronger, informing a more coherent pattern. Third, multi-channel invasion. The third possibility is that several channels may be involved at the same time. And this produces more complex and overlapping presentations. Again, this reminds us that textbook patterns are usually cleaner than real patients. A patient may describe pain across several regions, different channel pathways may overlap, and an external pathogen may invade more than one channel, or one channel problem may influence another through channel relationships. Therefore, you should not force every patient into a single channel diagnosis. Instead, map the symptoms. Ask, where does the symptom begin? Where does it travel? What aggravates it? What organs accompany it? Which channel or channels follow the route? That is the logic of channel differentiation. And this brings us to an important distinction. We have previously studied the six-channel differentiation according to the Shanghan Lun. But now we will move now to the 12-channel differentiation. Well, they both use the language of Taiyang, Yangming, Shaoyang, Taiyin, Shaoyin, and Jueyin. But they're not exactly the same diagnostic system. So let's look at how they are different. So before we proceed to the individual channels, we need to clarify something that can easily become confusing. You have encountered Taiyang, Yaming, Shaoyang, Taiyin, Shaoyin, Jieyin, and now in 12-channel differentiation, you will encounter the same names again. The question is, are they the same? The answer to that is no. Let's begin with the 12-channel system. Here, our attention is directed toward individual channel pathways. We ask, where are the symptoms located? What channel passes through that area? Is there pain, swelling, numbness, or movement difficulty along that pathways? Are there signs of dysfunction in the organ associated with that channel? This is why 12-channel differentiation is particularly useful for acupuncture, moxibustion, or twina because we are mapping the patient's manifestations onto the channel system. The sixth channel, by contrast, is associated with the Shanghan Lun. It organizes disease according to the six yin-yang levels, Tai Yang, Yang Ming, Xiao Yang, Tai Yin, Xiao Yin, Jue Yin. The emphasis is on tracking cold damage, disease progression, and the systemic response and pathogenic death. So there's an important distinction. In 12-channel differentiation, Taiyang, for example, can refer to specific Taiyang channels, hand Taiyang small intestine, and food Taiyang bladder. But in the 6-channel differentiation, Taiyang functions as a broad diagnostic level within a progression of disease. Similarly, Yang Ming in the 6-channel system is not simply the stomach channel. It represents a particular stage and systemic pattern. So remember this. 6 channels primarily help us understand systemic disease progression and pathogen death, whereas 12 channels primarily help us localize manifestations along individual channel pathways and their related organs. Do not confuse the name of the channel with the name of the diagnostic level. The terminology overlaps, but the diagnostic purpose is certainly different. Let's begin by looking at the hand yin and yang ming channel patterns. We now begin looking at the actual clinical manifestations of individual channels. And there are two hand channels, the lung channel of hand tai yin and the large intestine channel of hand yang ming. The presentation reminds us that the hand channel traverses the arms, chest, and head, connecting the internal organs with the body surface. Recognizing symptoms along these pathways will help us localize pathogenic influence. Let's begin with the lung. Lung, hand, tayin. Let's look at the manifestation: chest distension, cough, panting, pain of the supraclavicular fossa, shoulder and back pain, medial arm pain, aversion to cold with fever, sweating, and shortage of qi. Now, instead of memorizing all of these, let's divide them into categories. First, we have organ-related manifestations: cough, panting, shortage of qi, chest distension. This makes sense because we are dealing with the lung. Then we have channel pathway manifestations: supraclavicular discomfort, shoulder pain, back pain, medial arm pain. So if a patient comes to you with medial arm pain, do not immediately say this is lung disease. That would be too simplistic. Instead, ask whether the location corresponds to the lung channel and whether there are supporting manifestations. Does the patient also have cough, shortness of breath, chest discomfort? Are there exterior symptoms? You build the pattern from the combination. Now compare that with the large intestine channel, hand yang ming. The manifestation includes yellowing of the eyes, dry mouth, constipation or loose stool, shoulder and finger pain, toothache, neck swelling, throat inflammation, and epistaxis. Again, separate them mentally. There are digestive or organ-related signs such as constipation and loose stools, and there are pathway manifestation involving the shoulder, finger, teeth, neck, throat, and nose. This teaches us something very practical about channel diagnosis. A pattern may complain about toothache, for example. From a channel perspective, we do not only ask about the tooth, we ask which channel traverses this region. What other symptoms accompany it? That is one of the strengths of channel differentiation. It encourages us to see apparently separate symptoms as potentially belonging to a single functional pathway. Let's move on and look at Han Xiaoyin, Taiyang, Jueyin, and Xiaoyang patterns. I will make the slide a little bit small. So we now have 4 channels next: heart, Han Xiaoyin; small intestine, Han Taiyang; pericardium, Han Jueyin; Sanjiao, Han Xiaoyang. So let's take them one at a time. Heart channel, Han Xiaoyin. So cardiac pain, dry throat, thirst, hypochondriac, and medial arm pain, heat in the palm, and yellowing of the eyes. Again, notice the mixture of internal and pathway symptoms. Cardiac pain relates to the associated organ. Medial arm pain relates to the channel course. Heat in the palm gives us another manifestation along the channel. This is the pattern we should learn to recognize. Internal function, external pathway. Small intestine channel, hantayang, deafness, yellow eyes, cheek swelling, nape and shoulder pain, sore throat, jaw swelling, inability to turn the head. Notice how many of these symptoms involve head, neck, jaw, shoulder, and sensory region. This is precisely because the channel trajectory of the channel trajectory. The patient's primary complaint may not sound like an intestinal problem at all. They may come because my jaw hurts, my neck is stiff, my cheek is swollen, I have pain behind the shoulder. So, channel differentiation allows us to investigate these manifestations according to the pathway rather than assuming every channel disorder must present primarily through its associated organ. Pericardium channel, hand yin, palpitation, heart vexation, cardiac pain, chest and hypochondrium fullness and pain, heat in the palms, axillary swelling, flash face. Here again, cardiac and chest manifestations are prominent, but we also see manifestation extending outward, the palms, axilla, and face. Sanjiao channel, hand Shaoyang. Finally, we have outer canthus pain, cheek and retroauricular swelling, lateral shoulder, arm, and elbow pain, deafness, tinnitus, chest pain, hypochondriac pain. Notice the word lateral. That becomes important. Shaoyang channels characteristically traverse more lateral regions of the body. So symptoms involve the outer eye, side of the head, around the ear, lateral shoulder, lateral arm. Again, do not memorize. Try to visualize the route of the channel. The body itself becomes a map. Let's so oh, hay nako. So let's go to the next one. The foot Yangming and Taiyang channel, no? So now we move to the hand channels, to the foot channels. Stomach foot Yangming, bladder foot Taiyang. So let's begin with the stomach, abdominal distension, mania, borborygmus, rapid hungering, breast and groin pain, knee swelling, aterolateral lower limb pain, dry lip sores, epistaxis, mouth deviation, throat inflammation. So there's a very strange mixture if you think only anatomically. But what does abdominal distension have to do with knee pain? What does hunger have to do with lips? Why would a stomach pattern include pain in the leg? The channel, right? So the 12 channel does not look only at the organ, it looks at the trajectory associated with the organ. So we divide again. Abdominal distension, borborygmus, rapid hungering, digestive manifestations. Channel manifestation, breast pain, groin pain, knee swelling, anterolateral leg pain. These are all channel manifestations. But there are also facial or head manifestation. Dry lip sores, nosebleed, mouth deviation, throat inflammation. Again, follow the pathway. Let's look at the bladder foot tayang, eye swelling and pain, nape pain, spinal column pain, lumbar pain, thigh and popliteal fossa pain, calf tearing pain, aversion to cold with fever, surging headache, nasal obstruction. Here again, think of the posterior of the body. Those are all bladder channel. Let's move further. I think you already get the logic. So even in the Shaoyang gallbladder channel, the same will be the case. And even in the foot Taiyin, the same will be the case. Or in the Shaoyin, kidney Shaoyin, foot Shaoyin kidney channel and the foot Jueyin liver channel, the same will be the case. So, why so I'm basically pushing the discussion a little bit forward because I think you already know the principle and the logic. Now we arrive at the most important slides at so far. This is a method for reading channel patterns. Up to this point, we have encountered many symptoms from different channels. Uh, but let's look at these. There are three clinical dimensions: Zhangfu organ dysfunction, impediment of channel qi, and reaction to the pathogen. This gives us a much easier diagnostic structure. So whenever you're evaluating a possible channel pattern, ask what is happening internally, what is happening in the channel, how is the body reacting to the pathogen. Let's examine each. First, Zhangfu organ dysfunction. The first dimension concerns symptoms associated with the internal organ: cardiac pain, abdominal distension, constipation, and panting. These manifestations reflect impairment of the organ associated with the channel. So if we're considering the lung channel, we might expect respiratory manifestations. If we're considering the stomach, digestive manifestations, or the heart or pericardium, cardiac or chest manifestations. So this first dimension asks, what is associated Zhangfu system doing or failing to do? The second is impediment of channel qi. Now we move from the organ to the pathway. We identify manifestations such as pain, swelling, dyskinesia along the physical course of the channel. So examples given include shoulder pain in the lung channel, lateral leg pain in the gallbladder channel. This is extremely important because where is the pain, right? Because the geography of the symptoms will help us identify the channel. The patient is giving you a channel map through the symptoms. Third, reaction to the pathogen. The third dimension concerns the body's systemic response: fever, aversion to cold, sweating, throat swelling, epistaxis. These signs help us understand how the body is responding to the pathogenic factors. So remember, organ, pathway, pathogen. Or what organ is affected, where is the channel affected, and how is the body reacting. So these are two different manifestations, right? So you have only to distinguish, is it a question of warm disease? If it's a question of warm disease, you have the four system and the Sanjiao system. Or is it a primarily channel or musculoskeletal disorder? Then you follow the 12 channels differently. Okay? So, how do we apply these? I will also provide it here. Identify the Jiao, assess transmission stage, map channel pathways, determine treatment principles. So, in this lecture today, we've looked at the Sanjiao theory, the transmission rules, and the 12 channels. Thank you very much for listening. As announced, I will upload a longer 4-hour recording of the case writing because that will necessitates a little technicality. And I think by recording it, talking about the case study, case writing in a pre-recorded manner, it will substitute your class next week and also at the same time prepare you to writing your cases. Remember, you've only given me 2 case studies. You still owe me 1 more. Thank you very much and have a nice day, everyone.